So every year since I believe 2022, Ursula K. Le Guin's estate has been running this award called the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, and this is an award given to a sci-fi fantasy author for a book that kind of is in line with what Ursula K. Le Guin, wrote and championed. So typically, I really like this award, and I like reading all of the shortlisted nominees for this award because I feel like it is usually different nominees than we usually see for like the Locust, the Hugo, and the Nebulas, which I feel like are like a bunch of the same books and authors repeated over and over again. But with the Ursula K. Le Guin Award, they really try to find like sort of lesser known authors, debut authors, authors of color, queer authors, trans authors who are maybe coming from smaller presses that don't have a lot of marketing. And all of these books usually are very unique and fresh and just, again, really in line with Ursula K. Le Guin's work, which I love. So I love reading the nominees for this award, and I wanted to go through and read the shortlisted nominees for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction for 2025, and then give you guys my thoughts on them, rank them, tell you which ones you should read and which ones maybe you should skip out. Honestly, overall, there's just like one work that I would say don't bother with on this list, maybe two, but overall, I really liked reading all of these nominees, all of these shortlisted books. I have my favorites. I have the one I want to win, and then the other ones that I would be okay with seeing winning, and then the ones that I don't think deserve to win. But overall, a lot of great books in this list, and again, it's so refreshing to see a list that isn't just the same three names repeated over and over again, and I really highly recommend checking out this award and also doing what I'm doing. So I'm going to go from my least favorite to my favorite, and I'm going to tell you the book, tell you a little bit about the book, why it worked or didn't work for me, what I think it could improve on, and then also end with telling you whether or not I think it is Le Guin. So let's get into it. Number 8 is Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins. This is a story of an AI mother learning about grief and processing grief of the death of her daughter told entirely via obituaries, social media posts, and other online formats like OED entries, stuff like that. I really love the premise of this book, the premise of a book about like a robot learning about grief told through perspectives of obituaries. I loved that premise, but I just thought the execution of that premise was not satisfying, at least to me personally, with this book. Because each chapter is an obituary, the meat of this book is obituaries. There's other stuff, like I said, but most of it is obituaries. It feels like we were just getting very repetitive and very blatant in your face like messages about grief and about death. Like, it's just the premise, what the author thinks we should feel about grief is just stated outright in every chapter, and it's so repetitive, and it doesn't really feel earned because it's not the AI, I think her name is Peregrine, sorry I don't remember a lot about this book even though I read it like 2 weeks ago, but the AI mother Peregrine, because it's such a weirdly told story, we don't actually see the AI like learning about grief and processing her own grief. It's just grief about other people, written from other people, and it just feels, again, the conclusions that each obituary gets to and the conclusions that Peregrine ultimately gets to feels very unearned, because it's not a traditional narrative where Peregrine goes through something and learns something and then learns, about grief, about experiencing grief. It's just every single chapter is telling us, and here's why, this person was great, and here's why their death is a tragedy, and here's what we should all feel about grief and about them dying. And that just really started to wear on me pretty early on in the book. I feel like maybe this was a short story or half the length, it would have been a lot better, but it just ended up feeling quite meandering, again, quite repetitive. I never really felt connected to the actual main characters, Peregrine and Poppy, and I think that's because the author says in the author's note that this story was written during the pandemic, and it was at first just a bunch of random, unconnected, fake obituaries, and then afterwards, when she was kind of trying to put them into a story, she came up with the idea of the AI mother, Poppy, and Peregrine, and that kind of shows, like, again, they feel so secondary to the obituaries, and it doesn't really feel like we're really reflecting their relationship or their journey or Peregrine's journey through the obituaries. It's just a bunch of random people that maybe they knew or interacted with at one point talking about grief, and then the book is over and it didn't really feel like I learned anything about the characters, or they learned anything and grew themselves. If we're going purely craft-wise, I feel like this book probably would get bumped up a few notches, maybe be at like the 6 or 7 placement out of 8 entries, but I just can't in good conscience rank it any higher because this book also takes a really sudden veer into Zionism at about like the 50% mark, and we suddenly start to focus really heavily on characters who fight for the creation of Israel as a state, are born in Israel, live in Israel, and nowhere again is the state of Israel criticized in any way. All these characters are super positive about it. They love living there. They are very connected to Israel and feel very proud of it as a homeland. And nowhere in this book is Palestine or the Palestinian people mentioned, brought up at all, and that really bothered me. And it also makes this book's kind of shoddy attempt to talk about colonialism later in the book, colonialism on Mars, it makes that commentary feel so shallow and so pointless because the author skips over and doesn't want to address the colonialism happening on Earth in the present day in the land that her characters are from. And so that just really kind of soured this whole book for me, and this is the only one on the list I probably wouldn't recommend because of that Zionism and because of the way I felt like it just weakened the overall themes of the story. And also the premise is good, but it just doesn't carry the whole book. And I felt like ultimately it was quite, again, a meandering, unsatisfying book. And I'm kind of disappointed with the selection committee for putting this book on the list because, again, it doesn't feel like something Ursula K. Le Guin would write. It doesn't really have that ethos. It is so Zionist in the middle, and it just isn't good. So I don't know why this is on the list, but that's that for Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins. Coming in at number 7 is Blackheart Man by Nalo Hopkinson. This is about musician historian Vekasi, who is kind of a troublemaker, who is trying to keep his head down, marry his two partners, and become a full music historian when he is kind of unwittingly drawn into a conflict between the island's rulers and history and myths and the forces that are coming to try to colonize it. This is a story with really good bones and a very fun, charming atmosphere that ultimately just falls apart in the second half. This book genuinely feels like a rough draft that just needed some more time in the oven, needed to kind of be ripped apart and put back together. Vekasi is an incredibly frustrating and unlikable main character, and I normally love unlikable main characters, but Vekasi is just so emotionally unintelligent and kind of a dick, and it just feels like he's using the people around him who really love him and are very selfless and want to help him. And I feel like a lot of page time is spent on his slice of life shenanigans and his 4 romantic interests, which just took away from him actually getting involved in the overall plot or feeling like he had grown or changed at all by the end. I wish Vekasi had been more involved in the overarching plot, or that we had had more POVs to show the political intrigue between the island's council of rulers and the kind of people who are coming to try to colonize it, because Vekasi is so not involved in that at all. And so when that's what the whole story is about, but he is so not present in it, it just made that kind of plot feel so distant. And then the only thing that we have in place of it is Vekasi walking around being a dick to his fiancés, and it's like, okay, great. I really don't care about him. I wish that we had again focused more on Vekasi's personal character development and less on his love interests. Maybe let's just have him have 2 love interests, or even just 1, even though I love a throuple, I love a polycule, but I just felt like there was so many love interests in this book that came out of nowhere. There just wasn't really enough time to properly develop any of them, and I was really dissatisfied with the way that those romances and the time spent on those romances took away from what it felt like could have been time dedicated to Vekasi's personal character growth instead. Like I said, this book does have a certain amount of humor and charm, and I did really like the world building. I just felt like it kind of had a very wide focus and was trying to do a little bit too much for its page count, and kind of chose to focus on maybe the less interesting parts of the plot of the world when it could have focused, I don't know, it could have been really good, but it just fell flat for me. But it still, again, was very fun and charming. So not the best, but I mean, I do recommend this one, I guess, if you were in the mood, if it sounds interesting. And is it Ursula K. Le Guin? I think so. I do think it is very interested in culture and non-traditional relationships, and the idea of certain people from one culture entering another culture and being confused and having to learn about that culture. So I do feel like this was Le Guin. Next, I have one of the only books I own from this list, The Sapling Cage by Margaret Killjoy. And this is about a 17-year-old girl named Laurel who doesn't fit in with the other boys in her small village, but she doesn't realize yet that that's because she is a trans girl and not a boy. She only knows at the beginning of this book that she desperately wants to be a witch, which is a female-only position. So with the help of her best friend, Laurel disguises herself as a girl and goes off to join the witches, learning about gender, magic, friendship, all while helping the witches deal with this mystery of this blight taking over the land and this greedy duchess who doesn't like the witches. This book just was not for me. It is very YA, even though it is not marketed as YA, and it almost is like middle grade. Like the characters in this book and the way that the themes are portrayed and the way that the plot is paced and the way that the prose is put together all feels very middle grade, like preteen. And that's not shade, by the way. That is 100% just me telling you, like, this is who this book is for. This book is for teenagers or preteens who like fantasy and want to learn more about trans identity, or maybe are trans and want to read a book with a trans girl as the main character. And in that respect, I think it does really well. I think it does a great job of like teaching kids, preteens, about transition and gender and like sexuality, being aromantic or asexual or demisexual, consent, respecting people's consent, deciding whether or not you want to physically transition, stuff like that. Very wholesome, very sweet, but just not what I, a 23-year-old woman who already knows all this stuff, is already very well versed in trans identity and sexuality and consent and physical transition and stuff like that. I just didn't need this book. And I don't read a lot of YA. I'm just not the target audience for this, but I didn't think it was necessarily bad. And again, I do think that the portrayal of a trans girl in this, although, you know, I'm not a trans girl, so I can't 100% say that it's an authentic portrayal, but I did find it to be very real feeling and very well done in its discussions about physical transition and the way that Laurel is perceived by other people, the way it feels being a trans person in a cis majority environment, especially one that is like gender segregated. So a lot of really great stuff in this book, just not stuff that I needed and not stuff that I enjoyed. It's just not for me, and that's okay. My one slight nitpick with this book and the way it portrays the trans experience is the idea that the transition spell that Laurel and her friends find out about requires a cis woman to give up her bones for the trans woman, which I don't know, I think it's just meant to show that like Laurel has people around her that would be willing to do that for her, that love her and like want to support her through her transition. Like that's the allegory here, that like there will be people in your life who support your transition and like will go to great lengths to help you do that. But like the actual analogy, the actual allegory being that you are stealing their bones is just kind of, I don't know, I don't like that. I feel like that's totally an unintended undertone, and it's just an unfortunate one, but that was my only gripe with the trans experience in this book. Again, overall, not for me, but I would totally give this book to a trans teenager, or again, just a cis teenager who wanted to learn more about gender and wanted a fantasy book in which to do it. And it does feel like a spiritual successor to Tamora Pierce's Alana books, but with like a much more fresh and modern take on being transgender and being a woman in general. So not for me, but there it is. I purchased this book because it was one of the only ones on the shortlist that my library didn't have, and it's from like a small publisher, so I wanted to support them. I will probably be putting this in a free library or donating it to my local independent bookstore because not for me, but I want other people to experience this. I think it would work really well for some people. And I think usually the Ursula K. Le Guin Award does have like at least one book on the list that is like for younger people, which I think is fine, just not for me. So coming in at number 5 is The City in Glass by Nevo. This is a story about this demon, Vitrine, who has lived in and influenced this one city for centuries and has gotten really attached to the city and the people living in the city, when one day angels arrive and raze the city to the ground, and Vitrine is kind of the only one left and is kind of stuck processing her grief at the city being destroyed and like trying to rebuild it, all while trying to kind of rebuff the attentions of this one angel who was left behind and is now kind of stuck in the ruins of this city. I'm a big Nevo fan. I have a lot of books of mine on her shelves. I really like her novels, but I found this to be one of her weaker books. It is a self-indulgent and kind of semi-profound, self-described pandemic novel that I thought has a lot to say about cities and the people who live in them, but just like not necessarily anything really fresh or new about those topics to me. I just wanted more from this. I wanted more exploration of Vitrine's identity as a demon. What exactly are demons and angels in this world? It's not exactly, you know, a straightforward Christian portrayal of like evil demons tempting people into sin and like the godly angels coming to support them, but it's also not as straightforward as just like why specifically is Vitrine a demon? Why are they not just like any other spiritual mythological species? So I wanted more from that. I wanted more of the development of her relationship between the angel and the way that relationship ends and is portrayed. I wanted more of the actual experience of Vitrine grieving for and rebuilding this city. It feels like we see the city get destroyed, we see her grieve it, and then we time skip and the city's back, and it's like, okay, then what is the point of this story being about the city being destroyed completely? I just wanted more of that actual rebuilding process and that process of her learning to live with it being gone and then like trying to rebuild it. I still love Nevo's prose. I feel like her prose is just so rich and beautiful, and normally I'm not a huge fan of overly lyrical prose, but I really like it when Nevo does it. And her world building remains excellent, even though I wanted a little bit more from the angel and demon concept. I really liked the actual world building of the city itself and the world the city is in. I thought that was great. It reminded me a lot of Martha Wells's fantasy stuff, which again I love. I'm a big Martha Wells fantasy fan. So not one of her best novels, and I don't think this is really awards worthy, but I do recommend this novel, and it's pretty short. It's honestly more of a novella, so go pick this one up and read it and tell me what you think. In a strange medieval world filled with humanoid animals and eldritch ladies with a capital L, two young people suddenly become instrumental in defeating the beast that sleeps beneath their tower and is seeking to destroy the world in this Canterbury Tales inspired fantasy quest adventure. This is a book that I thought I would really love because I really love, like, I don't know, stories about an eldritch being waking up in like weird places and weird unfamiliar fantasy worlds, but I ended up being very lukewarm on this book, liking some things and not liking others, and feeling just overall very about it. I liked the world building, and I really liked especially Pechaček, I think is how you say it. I'm so sorry. I looked it up. I tried looking it up. I couldn't find a really good pronunciation, especially of the author's exact name, so I'm very sorry. Pechaček. I really liked the use of very familiar commonplace language to describe very unfamiliar and uncommonplace objects. Like, I just liked the disorienting effect that that had on the reader, and the way that like he would describe something as being a lantern or a beekeeper, and you would be like, I know what that is, I can picture that in my head. And then as he would continue to describe the object, or as it would become more important in the story, you would be like, that is not what I think a lantern is. That is something completely different. And I just really liked that aspect of the writing and the language. I thought that was great. But the writing style and the extremely slow pacing were mainly what dragged this story down for me and made me not super love it. I understand that the plot structure of this book is purposefully mimicking medieval romance style stories, where it's a character who's going on a journey to a place and they get stopped on that journey many times and just engage in a dialogue with some person who is meant to represent some viewpoint, and they end up either agreeing with them or disagreeing with them, and then they continue on. That's basically also the plot structure of this book. I understand what it's referencing, I understand what it's going for, and how that kind of reference to medieval romances, and especially the Canterbury Tales, ties into its deeper themes of class and tradition and decay. However, just because it's purposeful doesn't mean it's good, and doesn't mean I like it. I just felt like the plot felt very repetitive, and there was sort of no sense of overall tension. Like, they're supposed to be stopping this beast that is going to destroy the entire world, and they just keep stopping and spending months and months and months with random people, like doing stuff for them and learning from them, and it just felt like there was no really, they weren't moving with a purpose. I needed them to be moving with a purpose, and they were not. I just really had to force myself to push through portions of this book when I thought I would love it and I thought I would really, fly through it. I also found the writing style to be quite plain and also very dense. It was a lot of very dense paragraphs and paragraphs long descriptions of everything in the room, everything that people are wearing and doing and seeing. And like, while some of this was fun, because again, it is such a weird world that is so different from our own and uses, again, very similar concepts and words for very different things, a lot of it just, my eyes would start to glaze over. It would be, again, very, very dense, repetitive prose that I just couldn't really get into. I liked the prose the most and found the writing to be at its best when it was describing very weird things, very, it would get a little weird with it. The ladies would come in the room and like the prose would get all weird. I really liked that. But that's not the majority of the book. The majority of the book, again, is told in very plain, straightforward, again, medieval romance inspired prose that I didn't love. And I liked this book's very cavalier and unique attitude towards gender. In this world, gender is really determined by your job or your class, but I would have liked this concept to be explored a little bit more. It's almost treated like a plot twist because it happens to one of the main characters like 70% of the way into the book, and then at that point we're already kind of in the end game, so we don't really have a lot of time to dwell on like whether that character knew that was going to happen and that's why they chose this job, whether they are happy like that or they want to go back to their old gender. Like, nothing like that is ever explored, and I think that's kind of a missed opportunity when you are doing something like this with gender. Instead of having us know that that can happen from the beginning of the story and really letting us explore that, again, it's almost treated like it's a plot twist, like some sort of shocking thing, everything that happens to this character, when I would have liked it to just be, you know, a little bit more explored. But this is a beautifully illustrated book that feels very unique and new, but not as fresh as I hoped, and I just didn't love the pacing of this book, the way the plot was structured, although I liked the characters and I liked their ultimate journey. This book did well at some things and just didn't satisfy me with other aspects of it. So again, not just one that's like kind of not for me. I feel like it has a little bit more cracks in it, but I do really respect this book and think it has a clear vision, is doing something very purposeful and very ambitious, which is why it's so high up in this list, even though like I probably liked The City in Glass a little bit more than it, but I just feel like this book was more ambitious and really did something, like set out to do something and accomplish that pretty well. It's not the book's fault that I just don't like what it's setting out to accomplish. And is it Le Guin? Yes, I think it is. It is very, again, concerned with culture and community and gender, and I like those aspects of it. We have North Continent Ribbon by Ursula Whitcher. This is another one of the books that my library didn't have, so I bought it, and with this one, I am definitely keeping this book because I just loved this. This is set in the world of Nakharat, where ribbons are promises and promises are secrets. It's a short story collection that takes us on a tour of this alien world, Nakharat. And it weaves this vaguely interconnected story about love and labor organization, featuring, but not limited to, a princess and the corporate assassin sent to murder her, a judge and his sentient book, sex workers, and revolutionaries trying to free trains with human consciousness trapped inside of them. So, a lot of fun stuff in this book. I just thought this was a lovely, really fun short story collection featuring a lot of interesting concepts and characters and very well done but subtle world building that kind of just stays in the background and like is very skillfully interwoven through the book. I know that that style doesn't work for a lot of people. They want to be info dumped too. They want to know very well the rules of the world and how it works and like what exactly is going on. But I really liked the way that this was done in here. It felt a lot like, weird comparison, but it felt a lot like the 9 Fox Gambit world, which Yoon Ha Lee did blurb it on the back, in the way that like you can tell that there is such a rich and well thought out world behind this story, but the author doesn't feel the need to sit you down and explain every little aspect and every little word in it to you, which I really like. I like it when I feel like an author is like respecting my ability to put pieces together like that. So I enjoyed that, but I don't think it's for everyone. I also thought that the prose in this book was just great. I loved the prose in this book. Ironically, because her name is Ursula, it did feel like the most like Ursula K. Le Guin's prose to me, and I love Le Guin's prose. I feel like it is kind of understated and dry, but with a very thoughtful deliberateness to it. Like, it's not just plain because it's a rough draft, it's plain because she really carefully chose the words that she chose for a reason, and I felt like that was also what this book did. And this book's prose also just felt very warm, and I felt like I was really there and like could see and understand the characters and see their emotions and what they were feeling, despite the book not really spelling it out for you. Like, it doesn't sit down and tell you like certain characters are happy or sad or doing this or doing that, but like you can really pick up on stuff that is underneath the surface, and I really liked that aspect of the prose and the writing construction. And while, again, the stories in this aren't necessarily connected, they are interconnected. It feels like a lot of the stories are thematically connected. They are all really discussing queer love and labor organization, which are both themes that I love, and two themes that I feel like go together very well but aren't often paired together. The only other book I can think of is August Clark's Medal from Heaven, which I also love. I also felt like a lot of the stories in this like built off of each other, so like something would be mentioned in one story and then in the next story, which would be like, you know, a couple years later, we would pick up that concept and really thoroughly explore that. So I don't know, I just really loved all these stories and all the characters featured in it, and I love the author's writing style, and I really hope that Ursula Whitcher writes like a full-length novel in this world in Nakharat, because I loved it. I just feel like I can't place it any higher because it is so short and it is a short story collection. I felt like the other books above it were a little bit more ambitious and a little bit more did a lot more that they were setting out to do, but I still very, very much loved this, and I will be keeping this copy and annotating the hell out of it because, again, I loved the prose. But this is one that is very highly recommended. And also, I ordered this from Neon Hemlock, and I want to give them a shout out because there was like some sort of bug with my order. It didn't ship in a timely manner, and I emailed them and they were very polite about it, and sent it to me right away. So good on Neon Hemlock. And North Continent Ribbon by Ursula Whitcher. Is it Le Guin? Yes, a very Le Guin. Someone even compared it to, in the blurbs, Michael J. DeLuca called it Le Guin's Orsinian tales, but queer and sexy, and I very much agree with that comparison. So very Le Guin, very good. Please read this one. Okay, moving into my top 2. The next book on this list, number 2, is Archangels of Funk by Andrea Hairston. Now this book made me take a pause when I first saw it on this list because it is the sequel. It is a sequel. It is the second book in the Cinnamon Jones series, and it follows a grown-up Cinnamon who is trying to eke out a living during a climate crisis, semi-cyberpunk leaning future, and she is dealing with love and corporations and hackers as she attempts to put on her annual arts festival during the apocalypse. Again, second book in a series, I was like, okay, whatever, I'll read the first book and I'll read this as well. And I ended up loving both Cinnamon Jones books. I really loved We'll Do Magic for Small Change, which is the first book in this series, and I really loved Archangels of Funk too. This is a great, underrated, hidden gem of a series, and I really highly recommend everybody read it. You can kind of read Archangels of Funk as a standalone, I guess, but I feel like it really adds a lot to have read We'll Do Magic for Small Change, and it's also an amazing book, so I highly recommend reading both of them. The books are very different. Like, they couldn't be less similar in terms of like plot and vibes and pacing. Like, We'll Do Magic for Small Change is like very much a almost historical magical realism fantasy set in the 80s in Philadelphia, centering like a teenage black girl, and Archangels of Funk is set in the future. Cinnamon is like 40 years old. It's very much more of a sci-fi leaning book than a fantasy leaning book. It deals with like very, you know, high-tech technology and magic kind of through technology, and it's just a very different story, but it has kind of, both books have this like very strong heart and charm to them that just made me really love them, and a really strong main character. I loved Cinnamon. She has such a unique narrative voice and is also so funny and real and has problems, but like you just can't help but root for her and connect with her. I really loved Cinnamon, and I loved all her friends and her community, and again, it's a story again about like family and community and love, and I loved all those things. I also love just this book's vision of the future and how it does such a good job of balancing like this kind of utopic vision of art and community with this kind of more realistic feeling climate change and corporate greed. Like, it was just such a good balance for me. It, despite being again kind of what you would describe as like a cozy apocalypse book, really worked for me in ways that stuff like Becky Chambers' A Psalm for the Wild Bill didn't work for me, because it just felt so cozy and so sickly sweet and such a perfect vision of the future that didn't feel believable, whereas this felt very believable and had so much heart and charm, but still had like bad elements and danger and tension that really carried through the story for me. I just love this book. Such a gem, such a hidden gem. Please read the Cinnamon Jones series, and despite this being my number 2, I still would be very pleased if this book won. So, and is it Le Guin? Yes, very much so. Again, it is all about culture and community, and is this vision of the future that it is both realistic about the problems that we will face, but also very hopeful and very interested in gender and sexuality. Cinnamon is bisexual. She's in a throuple. She's in a throuple in the first book too, and they come back in this book, and I was very pleased at the throuple representation in this book and also the non-binary representation in this book. One of the characters in both We'll Do Magic for Small Change and Archangels of Funk is non-binary, so really appreciated that. Loved also the glimpses of Cinnamon's culture in this book. Again, just done so well. Really, really great. Love this one. And number 1, my favorite book that I read for this list, and the one that I want to win with every fiber of my being, is Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. This is the first book that I read for this shortlist. It was the first one I got, and I just absolutely loved it. And even after reading all of the nominees, I just love it, and I think it is so ambitious and so special and unique and does what it's doing so well in so few pages. Like, it is just so impressive to me. So let's actually talk about what Rake's Fall is and how it does those things. So Rake's Fall is a mind-bending adventure following 2 souls through time and space in this beautifully written story about colonialization, civilization, and love. It's really, really hard to describe the plot of this book or to describe anything more about this book without confusing people or without giving stuff away, so that is all I will say, and I'll just say go into this book completely blind and just let it take you for a ride. A book like this really requires the reader to kind of piece things together on their own. It's kind of almost like Harrow the Ninth in that way, which I love. I love being a puzzle reader and trying to have to figure out what is going on by myself, and I feel like with books like that, the author has to really find a balance in delivering information to the reader and also holding things back. You have to almost drip feed information to the reader, and if it's done in an uneven way, everything can end up falling apart. And I felt like, for the most part, this book did a really good job at drip feeding you that information. Some of the sections did feel longer and a bit more dragged out because we weren't seeing that connective tissue early enough, but for the most part, I thought it was really well done and delivered on that mystery premise. And the ending here, although it is cohesive and complete and makes it a complete satisfying story, it was not quite as satisfying as I wanted after this like completely wild ride it takes you on. But I do want to reread this story. I wanted to reread it immediately, and I think that's how you can tell the author has done something really special with, again, one of these books that's like requires the reader to really be figuring out and have their brain on while they're reading it, because you're like, I gotta go back and I gotta reread it so I can actually know what's going on this time. But yes, I just loved this beautiful and messy story so much that it is at the top of this list. I also think that Vajra Chandrasekhara's prose just really elevates this one to a level above for me. I loved his prose and I loved the way this story was told. It's just so, again, unique and different and so unapologetically Vajra Chandrasekhara, like so unique. His prose is just, the only way I could describe it is like vivid and feverish and delicious. Like, I don't know, I just ate it up. It reminded me a lot of Seth Dickinson's prose, especially in Exordia. She's up here. In Exordia, and honestly, it felt Rexfall in general felt a lot like Exordia to me in the way that it is very ambitious and unique and a little bit messy in parts, but still just like has this really compelling story and really compelling characters and a really unique sci-fi element to it. So I loved Rexfall. Again, it is doing so much in so little pages and does it very well in my opinion. This one is my favorite. I just love this book. I really want it to win. I think Vajra Chandrasekhara was also nominated last year for The Saint of Bright Doors, which I just read the other day and loved. I thought I like it even more than Rexfall, honestly. It's a great book in general, and a lot of the same things that I said about Rexfall apply to The Saint of Bright Doors, but just like that last 50 pages of The Saint of Bright Doors is insane and immediately bumped it up to 5 stars for me. I was like, your mind, you have a beautiful mind, Vajra Chandrasekhara, and I will be gladly and hopefully looking forward to whatever Vajra Chandrasekhara writes next. So I hope he wins this one. But I would be happy with Archangels of Funk winning. I would be happy with North Continent Ribbon winning. I would even be understanding of the West Passage winning. The award recipient will be announced on October 21st, which is Ursula K. Le Guin's birthday. It's also Chu from Luna's birthday, so big day for me. Yeah, so I again hope that Rexfall wins, but I would be happy to see, like, honestly, half these nominees win. I think, again, this is such a great award because it really gives the opportunity for lesser known authors writing weirder and queerer stories to win, and I just really appreciate what this award does for the community, and I really highly recommend people at least take a look at the shortlist and see what appeals to them there. So thank you so much for listening to me yap about the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction 2025, and I hope you have found some books that you are interested in reading, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!